The frontier was built on blood and justice. Subscribe and relive the untamed West. The year was 1864, and though the nation was weary from years of relentless fighting, for Jack Hinson, the war would never truly end. Once a quiet Tennessee farmer, a man who had long sought only the simple peace of his land and the laughter of his children, Jack had been transformed into something else entirely. The Union soldiers who patrolled the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers no longer spoke of him as just another enemy. To them, he was the ghost sniper, a phantom who appeared from nowhere, struck with impossible precision, and vanished before a man's body even touched the ground. His name carried more fear than an entire regiment, and his rifle, crafted for him with deadly accuracy, had become as infamous as his story. Yet behind the legend was not triumph, but grief. Grief that carved itself deeper into him with every kill. Grief that whispered in his ears during the lonely nights when he remembered the faces of his sons. The Civil War was entering its fourth bloody year. Union forces pressed deeper into the South, determined to crush what remained of the rebellion, while towns along the rivers filled with the sound of boots, wagon wheels, and the iron weight of warships sliding across dark waters. But in the forests and the hills where shadows lived longer than the day, Jack Hinson endured. He was 70 years old, his beard streaked with gray, his shoulders bent under the twin burdens of age and vengeance, yet his eyes were still sharp, as cold and steady as the barrel of the rifle he carried every dawn into the wilderness. The land that Union soldiers found hostile and strange was Jack's home, every ridge and hidden hollow known to him as well as the call of his own breath. The Union Army had fought Confederate armies in great battles, scattered guerrilla bands, and crushed resistance wherever they could, but they could not silence this one man. Officers fell from their saddles with holes clean through their hearts, patrols were wiped away by a single shot, and the more they pursued him, the more he seemed to slip from their grasp. Rumors bloomed in every camp. Some said he was aided by local farmers, hidden in barns or caves. Others claimed he was no man at all but a spirit born from the South's suffering, summoned to deliver vengeance on blue-coated invaders. Even Union commanders who scoffed at superstition admitted that they had no clear answer for how to stop him. They offered rewards, dispatched scouts, and sent hand-picked men to track him, but each effort ended the same: silence, confusion, and another rifle shot echoing across the hills. For all the terror he inspired, Jack Hinson was still flesh and blood, and flesh grows weary. His bones ached from years of living in the wild. His body longed for the warmth of rest, and though his hands never trembled on the trigger, his heart grew heavier with each passing day. At night, when he found shelter in his cabin or in a trusted neighbor's barn, the silence pressed against him like the weight of the earth. Sometimes he ran his fingers along the cool steel of his rifle and remembered the day it had been made. It had not been forged for glory, nor to win battles for generals and governments. It was built for a father, for a man whose sons had been taken from him in cruelty. He told himself it was justice. But as the years stretched on, justice had blurred into vengeance, and vengeance, he knew, had no end. And yet he could not stop. Each time his bullet found its mark, he imagined it as a gift to the memory of his sons, a fragment of repayment for the lives that had been stolen. But in the deepest part of him, Jack understood the truth. No number of fallen soldiers would ever bring his boys back. No tally of kills could balance that scale. Still, the oath he had taken remained unbroken, driving him forward even when his heart faltered. By 1864, Jack had become more than a man. He was a story that moved with the wind, a presence that soldiers swore they could feel even in the dead of night. Recruits whispered about him as they marched along the riverbanks, speaking of a flash from the hills, the crack of a rifle, the sudden collapse of a comrade into the mud. Some claimed they had felt his eyes on them, unseen but undeniable. Officers discouraged such talk, warning that fear itself gave the phantom power, but the silence only made the stories grow. The more they feared him, the greater his legend became, and the greater his legend became, the more invincible he seemed. Jack Hinson was no longer merely a grieving father avenging his sons. He had become a symbol of defiance, a single man showing the might of an empire that even one determined spirit could not be subdued. He carried no flag, commanded no soldiers, and fought for no cause but his own. Yet his war was as real and as unrelenting as any fought on the grand battlefields of the nation. The Union struggled for the future of America. Jack fought for something more personal, a war that stretched beyond victory or defeat, a war without end. And in that war there would never be surrender. By the autumn of 1864, the Union Army was desperate. Their campaigns in Tennessee had drained men and resources, but one ghost of a man continued to undermine their grip on the region. Jack Hinson, once a farmer of little renown, had become the Union's most enduring nightmare. His rifle had claimed officers and common soldiers alike, and every shot sent ripples of fear through the ranks. Union commanders could no longer ignore him. His legend was spreading not only among the troops but into the halls of command, where reports of the phantom sniper landed on desks already heavy with the burden of war. They could not afford to let one man, one old man at that, make them appear weak. A plan was drawn. Patrols were doubled along the rivers, scouts dispatched to search the hills and valleys where Hinson was rumored to prowl. Union officers mapped out his supposed hunting grounds, plotting every knoll and hollow trying to cage him like an animal. Rewards were offered to locals who might betray him, though few dared. Those who did were often met with silence from their neighbors, or worse, the cold understanding that aiding the Union might earn them a place on Hinson's rifle sights. Jack had become not only a legend but a shadow protector of his land. Even those who did not condone killing found themselves unwilling to help the invaders who had taken his sons. Yet the Union did not rely solely on bribes. They sent trackers, men skilled in reading the forest floor, hunters who could follow broken branches, faint footprints, and the smell of campfire smoke. They followed trails into the woods, certain they had him cornered, only to find themselves drawn deeper into a labyrinth Jack knew better than anyone alive. Sometimes they returned, weary and frustrated. Sometimes they didn't return at all. The forest swallowed them, and a rifle crack echoed days later as if to remind the Union of their failure. Jack watched their efforts with the patience of a predator. From his high perches in the cliffs and hollows, he studied their movements, learned their habits, and struck when the moment was right. A column of soldiers marching along the riverbank would lose its lead man with one clean shot. A patrol crossing a field would scatter in terror as a single bullet dropped their sergeant. Jack did not waste ammunition. Every pull of the trigger was deliberate, and each shot carried with it a piece of his oath. The Union believed they were closing in, but Jack turned their search into his own hunt. Still, he felt the net tightening. He was older now, his body slower to recover from long nights in the cold hills. Each time he returned to his cabin, he lingered longer by the hearth, staring into the flames as though they could give him answers. He wondered how much longer he could keep fighting. He knew the Union would never stop. They were relentless, not just as soldiers but as an institution, a machine of war that ground on without rest. For them, capturing or killing him was not about vengeance. It was about control, about proving that no one could stand against their power. For Jack, survival was personal, carved into his heart by grief and rage. One evening, as he cleaned his rifle by the fading light, he thought of his sons. He remembered their laughter echoing across the fields, the way their hands had worked beside his, strong and eager to build a life that now would never come. That memory steadied his hands even as his heart ached. He whispered aloud, as he often did, a promise to them. "Not yet. I'm not finished." The Union, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. Their officers wrote in dispatches of the humiliation of losing men to a single sniper. They scoured farms, interrogated families, burned barns suspected of hiding him. Innocent civilians bore the weight of their frustration, caught between loyalty to their land and the iron fist of occupation. Each act of cruelty only deepened resentment, strengthening the silent support that shielded Jack. He did not ask for their help, yet in their silence, in their refusal to betray him, he found a kind of unspoken alliance. He was their shadow defender, their living ghost who punished the oppressors from the woods. One winter night, a Union detachment believed they had finally trapped him. They had followed reports of smoke rising in a hollow deep in the hills. Moving quietly, they surrounded the spot, rifles ready, hearts pounding with the thrill of finally ending the ghost's reign. But when they rushed in, they found only the smoldering remains of a fire and a single carved mark on a tree. The initials, J.H. It was not an accident. Jack had left it there, a message as sharp as any bullet. He was not fleeing. He was watching, always watching. The chase became more than a military operation. It became personal for the Union men who had lost comrades, friends, and leaders to his rifle. They dreamed of catching him, of putting an end to the phantom. But in their dreams, as in their days, they could not escape the shadow of the hills, nor the knowledge that Jack Hinson knew the land, the woods, the rivers, better than any of them ever would. For Jack, the tightening net was both danger and affirmation. The more they hunted him, the more his legend grew. The more his legend grew, the more his son's memories burned bright in his heart. He did not fight for victory in the war between North and South. He fought his own war, a silent war, one that would never end until he did. Winter lay heavy over Tennessee, the forests stripped bare, the fields hardened under frost. The rivers that had once shimmered in the sunlight now ran cold and gray, carrying the echoes of war downstream. For most men, the cold was an enemy. For Jack Hinson, it was a cloak. The frozen ground muffled tracks, and the barren trees gave him clear lines of sight across valleys and ridges. But as the season deepened, he began to feel a truth he had long resisted. His body was no longer the unyielding weapon it had once been. Jack was nearly 60 years old now, his hair streaked with white, his hands stiff with age. The nights in the woods, which once passed quickly with only a blanket and a fire, now left his bones aching. Each climb up the hills took longer. Each aim through the rifle scope strained his eyes more than before. He had spent years waging his private war, and though his spirit was unbroken, the weight of years pressed down harder with each passing day. Still, he endured. The Union Army had tightened their patrols, spreading across the land like a net cast wide. Scouts searched the ridges, cavalry combed the valleys, and informants whispered rumors into officers' ears. Some swore they had seen him in the shadows. Others claimed he was already dead. Jack turned their rumors to his advantage, moving quietly at night, leaving just enough traces to confuse them. Sometimes he let them think they were close, only to vanish into the mist and reappear miles away. But as the net drew tighter, Jack found himself confronting not just the soldiers, but his own mortality. One bitter evening, after a day of stalking a Union patrol, he slipped on a patch of ice and fell hard against the rocks. The pain in his ribs burned like fire. For hours he lay there under the canopy of winter stars, fighting against the temptation to close his eyes. His rifle lay beside him, its cold barrel a reminder of the vow he had sworn. With trembling hands he pulled himself up and whispered into the night, "Not yet." The pain followed him for weeks, slowing his movements. He felt the creeping hand of age in every breath, every step. Yet, even then, he struck. Union officers continued to fall under his sights, each shot a reminder that the ghost of Tennessee was not gone. His enemies spoke of him with fear, wondering how a man his age could outwit entire regiments. For Jack, the answer was simple. He had nothing left to lose. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous of all. In his rare moments at the cabin, Jack lingered with his wife. She had borne her grief silently, watching her husband vanish into the woods time and again, knowing each departure might be his last. She saw the toll it took on him, the lines on his face, the stiffness in his walk, but she did not stop him. She understood that his war was not just vengeance, but survival of the spirit. Without it, he would wither away as surely as the crops left untended in the fields. One night, she placed her hand on his and asked softly, "How much longer can you carry this, Jack?" He did not answer at first. The firelight danced across his weary eyes, reflecting the storm within. Finally, he said, "As long as it takes. They took my boys. I'll carry this until my last breath." The Union, too, began to wonder how much longer the chase could continue. Each failed attempt to capture him drained morale. Each dead officer stoked anger among the ranks. Soldiers whispered of curses, of a phantom that no man could kill. The older ones shook their heads and muttered that it was simply Jack Hinson, a man who knew the land better than any map. Yet even they could not explain how he endured year after year, striking and vanishing, as if time itself could not touch him. But time did touch him. Jack knew it in his bones. Each day was harder than the last, and though his resolve burned like fire, the vessel carrying it was growing frail. He began to wonder, not of victory, for he never sought it, but of legacy. Would his war mean anything when he was gone? Would the memory of his sons fade into silence, or would his rifle shots echo long after the smoke cleared? One evening, high in the hills, Jack sat with his rifle across his lap, staring into the distance. He watched the Union patrols move like ants along the river. So far below, they looked harmless. He thought of the years he had stolen from them, the lives he had taken, and the fear he had sown. Yet beneath it all, he felt a weight pressing deeper than grief or anger. It was the weight of time, relentless and unyielding, reminding him that even legends are mortal. Still, he smiled. His hands, though trembling, held the rifle steady. He whispered once more to the night as though speaking to his sons, "They think they can end me, but I am not theirs to end." The tension in the woods thickened as Jack Hinson moved like a shadow through the dense underbrush. His eyes, hardened by grief and sharpened by months of planning, scanned every ridge and hollow. The Confederate sympathizers who had once whispered warnings of Union patrols were now silent, leaving him to navigate alone. Or so he thought. The air was filled with the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil, punctuated by the distant crack of rifle fire echoing from nearby skirmishes. Each sound was a reminder that the war had spread far beyond the fields and towns, into the forests and valleys where ordinary men, driven by vengeance and survival, became legends. Jack's mind replayed the horrors of that fateful morning when his sons were taken from him. The memory burned like a brand. Two young faces, eyes wide in disbelief and fear, dragged into the hands of soldiers who showed no mercy. He had promised to remain neutral, to protect his family without picking a side. But neutrality had crumbled beneath the weight of injustice, leaving only a path of retribution. Every shot fired now, every ambush laid, was not only a strategic maneuver but a personal vow. Those who had wronged his sons would pay. Navigating the uneven terrain, Jack approached a ridge overlooking a small Union encampment. The soldiers moved with casual confidence, unaware of the eyes watching them from the shadows. Jack's hands adjusted the scope of his rifle, a weapon that had become an extension of his will, as precise and deadly as the vengeance that fueled him. He knew that timing was everything. One misstep could cost him his life, and another failure might cost him more than he could bear. The tension coiled in his chest, a predator waiting to strike. From his vantage point, he observed a group of officers strategizing near a tent. Their laughter was bitter to his ears, a cruel echo that reminded him of the innocence lost. With steady hands and a steady breath, Jack took aim. Every muscle in his body was taut with focus, each heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the rifle's mechanics. Then, with a controlled exhale, he fired, the shot cutting through the morning air, a singular act of both vengeance and warning. Chaos erupted as men scrambled for cover, realizing too late that the hunter had become the shadow in their midst. The forest around him became both ally and confounder. Trees shielded his movements, yet their gnarled roots and low branches threatened to betray his position. Jack pressed onward, moving from cover to cover, leaving behind no trace except the whispered rumors that would soon spread among both Union and Confederate forces. Every encounter, every carefully plotted strike, was a calculated step in a game whose stakes were nothing less than life and death, and the soul of a man who refused to bow to fate. Night fell, bringing with it the cold bite of autumn. Jack found a secluded clearing to rest, his thoughts drifting to the faces of his family. The pain of loss mingled with the clarity of purpose. Vengeance was no longer just an idea. It was his identity. As stars blinked silently overhead, he sharpened his weapons and reviewed the path ahead. Tomorrow would bring more danger, more confrontation. But Jack Hinson was no ordinary man. He had become a force that history would remember, a sniper in the shadows, a father whose grief had forged him into legend. And in the quiet of the forest, his vow resonated. He would not surrender, not to fate, not to men, not to time. The first light of dawn crept over the Tennessee hills, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the scarred land. Jack Hinson moved with a purposeful calm, the weight of months of vengeance pressing upon his shoulders, yet somehow steadying his resolve. The forest that had both shielded and tested him now felt like a silent witness to his journey, a witness to the grief that had turned a reluctant farmer into a legend whispered about from town to town. Each step he took was deliberate, each breath measured, for he knew that this day could mark either the fulfillment of his oath or the end of his path. In the distance, the Union patrols he had been tracking stirred, unaware of the man who had haunted them from the shadows. Jack's eyes scanned the terrain, noting every ridge, every bend in the river, and every copse of trees that could provide cover. He thought of his sons, Robert and Thomas, whose lives had been stolen unjustly, their spirits the invisible companions of his every move. The memory of that cruel morning, of the brutal faces of soldiers and the echo of his son's last cries, had never left him. It fueled him still, sharper than any rifle, colder than any winter wind. Jack set up near a familiar ridge, one that offered a perfect view of the valley below. The patrol moved carelessly, confident in their numbers, oblivious to the shadowy figure poised above them. As he raised his rifle, the familiar rhythm of preparing, aiming, and firing washed over him, almost like a ritual. Each shot was not just a weapon discharged, but a sentence passed, a reckoning demanded. One by one, the soldiers fell, confusion and panic replacing their earlier arrogance. The forest around Jack seemed to breathe with him, embracing him as both predator and protector, a man transformed by loss and sharpened by grief into something more than ordinary. But Jack's war was not with soldiers alone. It was with fate, with the cruel hand of circumstance that had ripped his family apart. Even as he picked off targets with uncanny precision, he considered the broader canvas of his actions. Each strike sent ripples through the community, warnings to those who thought the law and military could operate without consequence, and tales that would grow into legend. People would speak of him not merely as a sniper, but as a figure of moral complexity, a man who chose his path when no law would protect the innocent, when no authority would recognize the depth of injustice. As the sun climbed higher, Jack moved silently through the underbrush, disappearing into the terrain that had become both battleground and sanctuary. Rumors of his deeds would spread quickly, carried by traders, neighbors, and whispered in taverns. "Hinson strikes again," they would murmur, the name transforming into myth. The farmer who had refused to bow, the father who had avenged his sons. Yet beneath the stories and the fear, there remained a man shaped by sorrow and duty, a man who had sacrificed peace for purpose, anonymity for justice as he saw it. Night fell once more, and Jack paused by a quiet stream to wash the day's blood from his hands. The reflection, staring back at him, was no longer the smiling, hesitant man of years before, but a figure carved by grief, resolve, and relentless action. He thought of his sons, of their laughter, and the tragedy that had ignited this path of shadows. And in that moment, a strange peace settled over him. Vengeance was not redemption, but it had given him a story, a legacy that would outlive even the scars of war. Jack Hinson, the reluctant farmer turned legendary sniper, had completed the final chapter of his immediate revenge. But the legend, the whispers, the myths, the tales of the silent hunter, would live on far beyond him. For those watching, Jack's story is more than history. It is a journey into the heart of courage, grief, and the relentless pursuit of justice. If you want to explore more untold tales of the Wild West, to step into the lives of outlaws and heroes who shaped a nation, then subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell to follow every chapter of Jack Hinson's story and dive into the legends that textbooks never dared to reveal. The frontier is vast, the shadows long, and the stories endless, and your adventure has only just begun.